My dad didn't raise his voice when he slid the eviction notice across the Thanksgiving table. He didn't have to. The paper made a dry, final sound against the wood, louder than the clatter of forks or the low hum of conversation that instantly died. "You've got 7 days," he said, like he was reminding me to take out the trash. "Your brother needs this place." I remember the smell of roasted turkey turning sour in my throat. My brother didn't even look at me, just kept cutting his food, calm, like this had always been the plan. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not panic, something quieter. Then the front door opened. No one had invited him. My neighbor stepped in, coat still dusted with cold air, holding a sealed envelope in his hand. His eyes met mine first, steady, knowing, before turning to my father. And in that moment, without a single word spoken, I knew something they didn't. I'm the kind of person people overlook until paperwork proves them wrong. All my life, I'd been the reliable one. The son who stayed close, who fixed things without being asked, who moved back into this house when Mom got sick, while my brother chased bigger, louder dreams in other cities. I paid the bills when Dad forgot. I handled the repairs. I kept everything standing while everyone else treated it like something temporary. And somehow that made me invisible. My brother was the favorite in ways no one ever admitted out loud. He was bold, charismatic, always arriving with stories that filled a room. I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on while he talked about them. When Mom passed, I didn't leave. I couldn't. This house wasn't just walls to me. It was the last place her voice still echoed. The last place where things made sense. Dad knew that. Which is why the eviction notice didn't feel impulsive. It felt practiced. Decided long before tonight, signed long before I ever saw it. They thought I'd fold, that I'd pack quietly, like I always handled everything else. What they never noticed was that I'd learned something from years of being overlooked. I paid attention. The signs had been there long before the paper touched the table. Dad had started speaking about the house like I wasn't in it. "When your brother settles in," he'd say, standing in the doorway, eyes drifting past me to the walls I'd repainted, the fixtures I'd replaced. Not if, when, like I was just a temporary inconvenience in a space I had quietly maintained for years. My brother visited more often too, but not for me. He'd walk through rooms with a slow, measuring gaze, fingertips brushing along shelves, opening cabinets, testing light switches. Once, he laughed under his breath and said, "Still using this old thing?" About the heater I had repaired myself last winter. I noticed the way Dad didn't correct him. At dinner, conversations would bend around me. Decisions discussed in half sentences. Glances exchanged over my shoulder. When I asked direct questions, answers came delayed, softened, like they were being adjusted in real time. One evening, I found new documents on the kitchen counter, property forms, partially covered by a newspaper. My name wasn't anywhere on them. My brother's was. No one mentioned it. And when I slid the papers back exactly where they'd been, I understood something with quiet clarity. This wasn't sudden. It was a slow replacement, carried out in plain sight, counting on me to stay exactly what I'd always been, silent, useful, and easy to move aside. The envelope in my neighbor's hand didn't look important. Plain, sealed, slightly creased at the edges like it had been carried with purpose, not care. Dad frowned at the interruption. "We're in the middle of dinner," he said, his voice tight with irritation, the same tone he used. Whenever something didn't go according to his plan, my neighbor didn't apologize. He stepped forward, placed the envelope gently on the table, right beside the eviction notice, and said, "This needs to be opened now." No one moved at first. Then Dad picked it up, almost dismissively, like he expected it to be irrelevant. I watched his expression shift as he read, first confusion, then a brief flicker of disbelief, and finally something I had never seen on his face before, uncertainty. My brother leaned over, trying to catch a glimpse, but Dad angled the paper away, reading it again more carefully this time, slower. That was the moment it clicked into place. Not just for him, but for me. I'd spent years reacting, adjusting, absorbing every decision they made. This was the first move that was mine, and it had already been set in motion long before tonight. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. For the first time, the silence in the room belonged to me. What they never asked, never even considered, was how the house had stayed afloat all these years. After Mom got sick, the medical bills came fast and quiet. Dad stopped opening envelopes. My brother stopped visiting. I was the one who sat at the kitchen table night after night, sorting statements, making calls, learning how debt moves, how ownership shifts when no one is paying attention. That's when I met Mr. Kareem next door, retired property lawyer, observant in the way people get when they've spent decades reading between lines instead of words. He never interfered, but he noticed things. Late notices, liens, the subtle signs of a house slipping out of someone's legal control. And one evening, when Dad signed a refinancing document he barely read, I noticed something too. A gap. Not illegal. Not even hidden. Just overlooked. With Mr. Kareem's guidance, I stepped in where responsibility had been abandoned. I covered the arrears, structured the payments, and quietly, carefully, ensured the legal interest reflected the one person actually holding the house together. There were signatures, deadlines, official records filed without announcement. No confrontation, no warning. By the time my brother started measuring the rooms, the outcome had already been decided. They just hadn't realized it yet. Dad's hand tightened slightly around the paper as he reached the last page. The room had gone still in that heavy, unnatural way, like even the walls were waiting. "What is this?" he asked, but the question wasn't directed at anyone in particular. It sounded smaller than I'd ever heard him. My neighbor didn't answer. He didn't need to. I stood up slowly, not to make a statement, just because it felt like the right moment to finally take up space. "It's the updated ownership record," I said, my voice steady. "Filed last month." My brother frowned, pushing his chair back just enough for it to scrape against the floor. "Updated how?" I met his eyes for the first time that night. "The house isn't transferable the way you planned." Dad looked up sharply. "What do you mean, isn't transferable?" I let the silence stretch just long enough, because it's no longer solely yours to give. The words didn't land loudly. They settled, slow and irreversible. Dad's gaze dropped back to the document, scanning for something that wasn't there anymore. Control, certainty, assumption. My brother said nothing this time, and for once, neither of them had a next move. No one raised their voice after that. That was the strangest part. Dad just sat there, shoulders slightly bent, reading the same lines over and over like they might rearrange themselves if he stared long enough. The authority he carried so easily before had thinned into something fragile, uncertain, almost careful. My brother was the first to stand, but not with his usual confidence. He paced once, twice, then stopped near the doorway, like he wasn't sure if he still belonged inside it. His earlier certainty about the house, about me, had nowhere to go now. "You planned this?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away, not out of hesitation, but because the answer was already obvious. Dad finally looked up at me, and for the first time in years, there was no assumption in his eyes. Just calculation, and something closer to regret than I expected. "This changes things," he said. It did, not just the house, not just who controlled what. It shifted something deeper, the roles we had all been playing without question. For years I had been the background, the one they built plans around, assuming I would adjust. Now they were the ones adjusting. And that's why it mattered. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't powerless. They're just waiting for the right moment to be heard, without ever raising their voice. I didn't celebrate after that night. There was no victory speech, no dramatic exit, just a quiet return to my room, the same walls, the same creaking floorboards, but everything felt different. Not because I had taken something from them, but because I had finally stopped letting it be taken from me. In the days that followed, the house settled into a new kind of silence. Dad spoke less, but when he did, it was measured, careful. My brother stopped walking, through rooms like he owned them. He started knocking. Nothing was repaired overnight. It wasn't that kind of ending. Trust doesn't rebuild itself just because the truth comes out, but something more honest took its place. Clear boundaries, defined roles, no assumptions left unspoken. As for me, I didn't stay out of obligation anymore. I stayed because I chose to. And I started making plans that didn't revolve around holding everything together for everyone else. The house would remain secure legally and practically. Whether I lived in it long term, that was finally my decision to make. That was the real shift. Not ownership on paper, but ownership of my own place in the story. Because in the end, I didn't need to take revenge loudly. I just made sure I was never easy to replace again.